Hi, all. Welcome to the Harbor YouTube channel. We are continuing our Vacation Bible School series at Harbor this summer. It has been such a delight to revisit some classic Bible stories with some fresh lens and have fun learning about them and engaging with them creatively. Last night, Jon, who I'm joined by, and I'm Dottie, Jon talked about the story of the fish and the loaves, or the feeding of the 5,000. So, Jon, tell us what did you share last night about this story?
Yeah, thanks, Dottie. Well, for those who weren't there, first, we should also mention that we did the Jesus Hokey Pokey and danced together on screen. We will
Yes,
not be reproducing that here now, but I want everyone to know that it happened.
yes,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, so we looked at the feeding of the 5,000. It appears in all four of the Gospels. There's also a feeding of the 4,000 that appears in two of the Gospels. We kind of looked at all of them, but we just looked at the story. We retold the story together. And then we took a look at two aspects that I think are interesting and that were kind of new to me, honestly. One is the emotional context of this story, which is that right before, almost everywhere the story is told, right before the feeding of the 5,000, we the reader of the Gospels learn about the death of John the Baptist, executed by Herod. And in Matthew's Gospel specifically, not only do we find out about that, then we hear this story, but Jesus has just found out about John's death. His cousin, his probably friend, ministry kind of ally, they're probably quite close. And he just found out that John is dead. So his disciples, John's disciples, and himself are all mourning. Jesus tries to get in a boat to escape the crowds to go grieve the loss of his cousin. But the crowds see him in the boat and they can figure out where he's going and they like beat him there. And so when he gets to the shore, again, just wanting to be alone, there's a ton of people, like there's 5,000 plus people waiting for him. And he has compassion on the people, even in that state of exhaustion, that state of grief. Does healings, preaches, and then ultimately does this what appears to be a miracle in the story of feeding the 5,000. So we talked a bit last night about grief, about exhaustion, about what it means to be in community and break bread together, even in the midst of seasons of our life like that. The
Yeah.
other big thing we looked at, which I thought was kind of cool, is that there are some principles of community organizing in this story. So rather than just like poof, now there's food for everyone to eat, instead people are sat down in groups, sitting together, and they come up with all the food that they do already have. And that is what is sort of the seed of the miracle. Whether you read this as a supernatural miracle of Jesus divinely multiplying bread and fish, or if you read it in a more um, naturalistic kind of way of there's a miracle of generosity happening. There's a miracle of mutual need and sharing and sacrifice. And then unbeknownst to everyone, they actually had the assets all along to meet each other's needs and to care for each other. However you read it, it's a pretty beautiful story. But communities of people are formed sitting together. The resources that they already have are brought to the table. And so these are kind of some of the bedrock principles of community organizing as a method for causing social change. So those are two of the big themes we looked at last time at Harbor.
Yeah, thanks. And the first theme is kind of a more traditional reading, but it's even in the more traditional interpretation of Jesus providing this miracle, the emotional context of Jesus struck so many of us. In the breakout room that I was leading, we were just taken back, imagining Jesus weary, needing space to weep. And I found that many of us were in this tension of when we are going through grief and exhaustion, it almost feels like we need to press a button where the world stops, right? And it's like, you know what, this person just passed away in my life. I need to shut it down. I need to not go to work or whatever it is. And I need community to support me. And yet, what's fascinating about this story is Jesus is going through this grief on such an intense level and also has the capacity to provide compassion. And so, what are your thoughts on, like, as many of us navigate grief for our own lives, like this tension of having boundaries for rest, for care, to be able to grieve, and also being able to still be in community while we grieve?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we should learn from the part of the story where Jesus is trying to be by himself, right? Like he doesn't get to, as the way the story unfolds, but
Yeah.
he is trying to create space for himself to be alone, to probably meditate and pray and cry and do the things he has to do to grieve. And I think we should have boundaries, like you mentioned, to provide self-care as we need. But what I also like about this story is that having those boundaries and providing ourselves with self-care doesn't actually do that thing that we might want it to do, where we press the button and the world around us stops. There's still
Yeah.
other people. There's still other people in pain and in need, and we are still in community with others, even when we need to have boundaries, even when we are caring for ourselves. And so I think that's a really cool picture. Another related theme that came up a lot in my discussion group was the idea of, like, what about those who are grieving in this story who aren't Jesus? And the
Yeah.
idea that they're allowing themselves to be fed. And so some other things were just stirred up for some of us, which is like how fiercely independent we sometimes try to be, and like we don't need help from others, but sometimes we do just need other people's compassion for us to be real, and we need to accept it and show ourselves compassion too in the midst of grief or exhaustion or whatever it may be.
Yeah, yeah. There's a deep thread of communalism in this story that is moving from the individual and into the corporate and into the communal. Which brings us to this conversation of community organizing. So, this was a take that many of us had never heard before on this story. That maybe Jesus performed a miracle, but maybe this miracle was people coming together, bringing their resources, organizing around providing this food. How long have you thought this way about this text, or is this something new you've come across for yourself?
In terms of this text, this is just brand new ground for me. I found an article this week, which is posted in our Circle Harbor social media group. If anyone wants to join that, tons of resources are there. But this is brand new. I mean, I probably for the last 5 years or so, I've been somewhat familiar with community organizing and like asset-based community development.
Mm.
And I really like applying those ideas to this story. Like, so the idea is something like a church doing a ministry like a soup kitchen or a food pantry is very one directional. Like, you are in need. We have what you need. Come to us, or even we'll go out to you and we will give you the things we have that you need. And it's very one up, one down. And the idea of community organizing is very, very different from that. It's let's be in relationship, let's be in community and discern together what the needs are. And then the assets and the strengths that are already here in this community will be primarily what we will draw from to meet the needs and allow everyone in the community to flourish. And this is just it's a cool way to read this story, that like it's their bread and their fish. Even if Jesus does provide a miracle, it's the multiplying of the community's own bread and fish, that so it is like tied to their own assets and their own strengths. And in the article too, one little bit that we didn't get to talk about last meeting is the author of this article was saying maybe it's really important too that the people were sat in these circles of 50 and 100, because they used to just be a huge crowd, but
Yeah,
now they're like little communities. They're
yeah,
looking into each other's eyes. They're
Yeah.
feeling each other's hunger and need. And so the idea is, as they're getting out, how many loaves do we have? How many fishes do we have? If someone's kind of secretly stashed away a little extra meal in their back pocket for later, now that they know the people sitting around them, now that they're in this together, they're going to pull that out and be like, oh, I have a little bit more. And so that's kind of how like the miracle might be taking place. So I thought that was a pretty cool read. What did you think of some of this community organizing stuff?
Yeah, I loved it. I thought about some of the little bits of community organizing I've done in-person spaces. But then I thought about Harbor, and I thought about our tiny little online church has been kind of practicing this. More recently, we have been doing a community care and mutual aid page on the Circle, where people will post needs and either post needs of other people or own needs. And like the needs have been from prayer requests to meal trains, to someone needing to go on work leave and us pitching in financially. And it's been really beautiful to see people in our community provide care and mutual aid to one another. And that it isn't, it doesn't feel one directional. It's so mutual, of folks holding one another and one person being cared for, and that person that's cared for also generously giving to another person. So I'm loving seeing our community practice this right now, of showing up in small ways and offering this mutual care and organizing together around certain causes. It's really fun.
Yeah, and to just throw this in there too, I love seeing the creativity that goes along with that. Like I think of someone in our group might say, I'm struggling with loneliness. And it's not clear how to help meet that need, but like someone will like knit a blanket and mail it to another person, or carve a little wooden fox, like just fun gifts that are, meeting people at the point of need.
Yes. Or, hey, I could use someone co-working with me today, and then people jumping on. So there are a lot of financial ways and like resources, but also just providing in different capacities. It's amazing. Yeah, yeah, it's really inspiring. And I think both of these themes that you brought together and these interpretations of the text, they hit on something that's happening in community that is quite profound. Jesus emotionally first, like navigating being in this community in such a, I'm sure, raw space and trying to figure it out. And I still have so many question marks around like how do we model our own grief with this story of Jesus's. I've been thinking about a lot of folks that I know that are in Alcoholics Anonymous, that will have this principle of, when I'm going through something, I also show up for other people, and how that is a really beautiful way to go about it. But many of us will be in this tension of when we're going through grief and we need to retreat, but also we need the community as well. It's just such a bizarre tension. And then the second thing of community organizing is just so profound, of like, let the community breathe life into itself and one another and provide in really profound ways. It's just, yeah, both of these themes are so exciting, Jon, and I'm glad you shared them with us. It was really powerful for many of us to learn.
Thanks, Dottie. Thanks. Well, for those who are watching who maybe are able to watch this video this week that we post it, we have one more VBS discussion coming up. Do you want to give us a little preview of our final VBS discussion?
Yes, our final VBS discussion. I will be leading us in a conversation about the story that Jesus shares of the house on the sand and the house on the rock, and we will be exploring that and wrapping up Vacation Bible School at Harbor, which has been an absolute treat and so much fun.